Welcome to Casually Unboxed Data, AI, and Everything, where we break down the world of data science and artificial intelligence, one conversation at a time. Each episode, you'll hear from industry leaders as they tackle the unique challenges and transformative opportunities facing large scale businesses. Let's tune in.
To everyone tuning in, welcome to Casually Unboxed for an unscripted, open conversation about data, AI, and frankly, everything. I am David Hardoon, CEO of Aboitiz Data Innovation. I am delighted to be joined today by Von Leong, the co-founder and general partner at Purpose Venture Capital, and if I may say, a prolific and sought-after speaker amongst other various hats. So welcome, Von. It's a pleasure to have you in the series.
Hi, David, and thank you for inviting me. It was unexpected surprise, but I love to do this unboxed conversation with you.
Great. An unexpected surprise on an unscripted conversation. So it sounds like a perfect combination already.
Okay, looking
So
forward.
let me jump straight into it. And I really would love, and I'm presuming, I mean, I'm not presuming, I'm very certain you spent quite a bit of time talking about it, thinking about it. What is purpose?
Oh, purpose. Oh, that's a great question. For me, at a personal level, purpose is really what is the meaning behind the thing that you do or why you're here on this earth, why you perform a certain role, or why you take up an opportunity. So, what is the purpose behind a decision? And I guess to me, that's purpose.
Wow. The number of questions that are popping into my mind straight away, especially when you think about, for example, my space of the world of AI. I would even argue that it's a bit of an existential dichotomy that's happening right now in terms of what is the actual underlying purpose? Is it done in a purposeful way? But before I even go down that path, you've defined purpose. And a question that I've always been wanting to ask for a very long time when it comes to investment as a whole. When you think about early stage investment, presumably, roughly at this early kind of onset. What is it really? And purpose is one, and I think a lot to be discussed there. And like I said, I'll go back to it. But what is it really? Is it the founders who come together to drive an idea, or is it the underlying idea? Because assuming at early stage, it's usually just that.
So, going back to that premise of purpose is really discovering the why, right? Before you do something.
Right.
So if we look at that on that premise, sometimes it's not just about the founders. Sometimes it's not just about the idea, but I think it's really about the why. And so the why usually starts with a problem statement. What is that challenge or problem or impact that you're trying to create? And as a result, you're now discovering a breakthrough, be it a business model or an idea or a scientific or technological innovation, or you pull together a team of smart people and who are ambitious and passionate about solving this problem. I think that's purposeful.
So in a way, it's a combination of you can never run away from the idea itself. There needs to be an anchor, perhaps at a better description, to driving a group of people. But it almost sounds like there needs to be a conviction of the individual with respect to the impact it would cause. So
Exactly.
if if I swing back to what I was touching earlier, and I would really love to hear how. First question is whether you've been asked this question as a whole, and if so, how you've been addressing it. When it comes to AI and AI type of be it investments, startups, activities as a whole, how does the two now worlds come together in terms of being purposeful? There's always debate about responsible AI, and I have my own views, which I'm happy to chime in, but I'm would love to hear from your perspective, sitting where you are, especially from a venture capital perspective point of view. How A, have you been asked that question? Have you been faced it? And B, how do you address it?
Firstly, I do not regard myself as an AI investor.
Hmm,
So I don't speak on behalf a lot of the investments that this space would operate in. But I see myself as an impact investor that's operating in
Okay.
the venture capital space because I believe in delivering. I'm trying to deliver on profit with purpose, right? So what that means for me is when I think about what is purposeful and how to leverage the emerging technologies such as AI to advance a very specific idea or to bring a solution to come to life, is really what kind of value creation that can be emerged from this technology. And as you probably know,
Mm.
David, you have been in this space for a very long time, far longer than I do. Okay. I'm not talking about age here. I'm talking about the fact that you spend so much time with your expertise in this domain. And we know that data is really the birth of AI in that sense, where AI is really not to invent something, but is to help humans to become a lot more intelligent, to use data as a way to create different type of content, different type of ideas, help us to discover new things, creating new insights, helping us to perform better decisions. In short, that's how I see AI. So in that perspective,
Mm.
when we invest in companies, we don't, because we were looking at both purpose and profit and less about the technology per se, because firstly, I'm not a
Sure.
technological expert, but in that regard, we want to see how you're going to be responsible with using that technology. And responsibility comes from both ways, two ways. One way is to say, how can I maximize the potential of this technology to help me to deliver my products or services or my idea? The other way is making sure that there's some ethical or responsible way of using that technology as such that I will not cause a negative impact either on my customers or the environment or the community around me. So for a perfect example would be one of our portfolio companies is called Archive. Archive is an ego engineering company that uses 3D printing. And what they do is that they manufacture and created this terracotta tiles in order to restore and prevent the degradation of marine ecosystems like coral reefs. So you originally might come from Philippines, if I'm not
Oh,
wrong.
no, no,
No, you're not. Okay, okay. I'm so
no.
sorry.
But I
But
do come from a place with a lot of coral reefs, the
okay,
Red
that's
Sea.
great. Please tell me more about yourself later. But basically, I was on the understanding that coral reefs actually helps, not just is a good carbon sink, but it's also good as a way to protect coastal villages, right? Protecting
Yeah.
coastal communities. So that solution actually helps to restore health to the community as well as to the planet in that sense. But at the same time, is a great investment for asset and property owners who want to protect those assets and maintaining those assets and also becoming a great global citizen. So it's a great solution. If you think about it, for investors, for the business owners, the asset owners like ports, property managers, and also for the villagers, for the communities. And so that is a great purpose. Then the question is, with that business model, can you generate profit? And the good news is it's been doing really well. And how do you use emerging technologies apart from 3D printing? They use IoT as a sensor and also using AI to read and to track the development and the progress of that treatment, as well as developing their own models in one day to be able to predict how of these solutions will be able to do better in the future. So I think this is really the cross-disciplinary of this different type of technologies that are integrated,
Yeah.
that can be delivered in a responsible way, but also delivering the impact that we hope to achieve.
You've said this now a few times during the course of the sharing, and I think it's a really important. It it's a potentially, and please feel free to tell me otherwise, but I think it's a potentially difficult term, but it's a very important one, which is responsibility. It's, and also to reemphasize, I think a point that you were mentioning, that it's a nexus between the purpose, technology, and I do take your point that it's agnostic ultimately from that perspective, but it's leveraging of technology, having an underlying purpose, the impact that it's trying to achieve, and how it's used responsibly. The thing that I sometimes struggle with, and again, maybe it is too tech specific, but let me give you an example. So 2018, I had the pleasure of working on the FEE principle. This is the fairness, ethics, accountability, and transparency, which essentially was guidelines on how to establish purposefulness and responsibility of the use of AI when using in the financial sector. And we had, it was amazing. We spent 6 to almost 8 months debating, having discourses on something that was ultimately just 14 principles, literally one page. It took us 6 to 8 months of debate. And there was one principle that didn't got in. And there was the principle of don't break the law. Because on the one hand, you see where I'm going with this. On the one hand, it's obviously it's a core element. Is you need to use technology, you need to do the right thing, and represented as don't break the law. But then we said, but isn't that obvious? Do we really need to spell it out? So you see where I'm getting with this. Now, I couldn't agree with you more. I could not agree with you more. Whatever technology is, or lack of technology, it needs to be used with a degree of responsibility. But does that mean people or their companies or there's initiatives or startups, and I know this, but a sensitive question potentially, that are consciously using it in a non-responsible?
I love what you just shared because it reminds me when I was having a debate with somebody. They said, "Oh, I'm also an impact investor. Why? Because I'm doing no harm." Wow, you're laughing, right? I'm laughing inside, but on outside, I'm trying to respect this individual who is
Oh,
prominent
sorry.
investor.
Yeah.
Okay, but you see where I'm coming from. To
Yes.
me, that's
No, no, no.
common sense. But
And that's my question.
but that doesn't make you an impact investor. An impact investor is you're intentional. You're
Okay.
going to measure it. Now, you measure it, it can be maybe the standards, the benchmarks, the frameworks may not be ready, but you're prepared to quantify qualifying it in terms of what are the effects or consequences of this investment. That to me is a true blue impact investor, right? So, of course, like anything, there's two sides. There is the positive impact and there's the negative impact. So you can be a negative impact investor for the joke of it. So responsible AI or responsible technologist or responsible investor is to then say, am I prepared to not just wear the lens and put in my own money and my network and my time and my effort to creating something that will not cause harmful effects?
Yeah.
And if I
No.
know there might be some harmful effects, can I take measures to mitigate or prevent those risks? Right?
Yeah.
So the question now for companies or investors or anyone who's sitting on a board is to ask those questions.
Yeah.
And as you imagine, you have been in that situation where you want to draw out this one page and 7 months, 6 or 7 months down the road, you can only agree to those couple of principles. But what about enforcement and
Mm.
implementation?
I
It's going to
and
take us
Vaughn,
decades with
you
sensible people.
hopefully, I'd like to call myself pragmatically optimistic. I think you've no, I think you've just said something that I don't know if you caught it, but you've literally given me a eureka moment. You've said something really powerful there. Deliberate intent, and I'll be the first one to raise my hand. Whereby I actually have not thought about that. My baseline has always been on the presumption of thinking of, let's just say, harm, not causing harm, and causing harm kind of situation. And what effectively you're referring to, and obviously it's from the impact investment point of view, but then I'll even bring it to the world of technology, as in I'm not investing, I'm in the process of developing technology or implementing technology. It is not just the notion of you're not out to cause harm, because again, presumably, and hopefully the vast majority of us are not intentful to go and actually do deliberately cause trouble. But that's not enough. It's having that deliberate intent to measure, assess, validate, a lack of a better description, that fact, the fact that you are doing the right thing, the fact that you are not causing harm, the fact that you are aligning to purposeful, let me use your term, agenda. I think that is a really powerful statement, which arguably, with the right switch, shouldn't be that hard to do. I'll give you another example. When I go back to my a while ago, I can count it in decades now, which is a bit alarming. And when early days of doing machine learning, data science, I never thought about discrimination in the way that we're discussing about it, let's say today in the broader society, gender, ethnicity, etc., and so forth. But I'm not an evil person. I'm not out to cause harm. I'm not out to do damage. But that wasn't something that was conscious in my mind as a developer, as a researcher. With what we know today, when I go or my teams or people that I work with go about it, we are intentfully thinking about that. So net the math, the science, the technology hasn't actually changed. Is that conscious switch of I'm going to pay attention to a few more things.
Mm.
That is really powerful. I think that's really important.
I would say that consciousness is what differentiate us and with animals and humans, right?
It
In
is.
that higher regard. The other thing is it's really about the philosophy of what we think life is, the purpose of life for us. And in our work, a course of our work, if we are technologists or engineers or builders, honestly, we will be far more excited about the applications of technologies. We may not think about, when we're too busy, we may not be able to bring ourselves to think about, oh, what would be the likely effects or the causes or the consequences of these decisions that we're making on on the daily basis. So I think sometimes when you talk about responsibility, it has to start with certain key players.
Mm.
And in my mind, you have worked in the government. I have worked in the Singapore government too. And if you adopt the systems thinking approach, where there's such a interrelation of the different factors, for certain type of population or certain type of group of people, like people who are in the application space, people who are the technologies and the builders, you have to use certain incentives or policies or set very specific frameworks or
Yeah.
guardrails to support, not to stifle innovation, but to create an ecosystem for innovation, but at the same time giving them some, hey, when you're thinking about this, what do you think about this? I think that needs to come right now, as we are seeing that the speed of AI development is so high. But I really think that the responsibility needs to lie with a couple of stakeholders. That would be the governments, the regulators, the big tech company owners,
Mm.
the boards, and those big companies, and also investors, because capital
Yeah.
is the biggest incentive.
Absolutely. In fact, I would argue it's the biggest in the end of the day.
It depends on what stage, right? So if I'm a big tech company, honestly, I can leverage the capital today from the markets. My valuation is so high.
Yeah.
I have so much muscle. I can, some of them is bigger than some of the country's GDP. Not to name the specific
Yep.
companies,
Yep.
but what that means is that they have real power to change things. So I'm not saying that the onus is on them. I'm saying the onus needs to come, the responsibility needs to come from very specific groups of people. And then the question is, how do we create an ecosystem to encourage more responsible use of AI or emerging technologies?
That's hitting the nail on the head. Where and you mentioned it a bit earlier when you're giving analogy of that one page that I worked on and saying, oh, but now it's even harder to focus on implementation. How do you get such a potentially different and eclectic group of organizations, individuals to really acknowledge their responsibility? Sometimes it's well, I would argue an actual responsibility when it's governments and regulators. That's the whole purpose of a government and regulator. to implicit responsibility and accountability when you talk about very large corporations. When you get to a certain size, it's even if you don't want to have a certain accountability, you it's like, sorry, yeah. When you're in the size of the states, you physics, gravity. When you get to a certain size, whether you like it or not, you're going to pull objects towards you. But how do we really get them? And if you think about that, and again, coming from your lens from investment, we've spent a lot of time in roundtables, discussions, panels, views. Are we heading in the right direction? Are we heading in the right direction? Or perhaps, let me ask that slightly differently. Are we heading there fast enough?
We are definitely, at least I think I can speak as a proud Singaporean. I
Yeah.
think we do have some sort of great strategy framework around it at this moment for this small little island. But I can't say for the rest of the world. I think sometimes politics get into the way of the will or the
Okay.
volition to implement responsible AI. Having said that, when you see that across the world, and investors' councils are coming together and said, let's try to work this out. We do not know what's ahead of us. Let's try to define a framework that works for both industry and governments. I see that as a healthy sense of development. But your question about is it fast enough is a valid and critical one. And nobody can have that answer with that geopolitical tensions going on, with the restrictions of exchange of data, of integrating technologies or pulling
Yeah.
people together. You how could you have a conducive global framework for AI safety and governance when the two largest economies are not sitting down together and talk about this? Having said
Mm.
that, I just read, I think it's an economist somewhere or the conversation that talks about Xi Jinping is really aware about the possibility of AI being a real threat, not so much on the security basis from the US, but he's starting to think about it is a real threat to his people, to the society at large. And he promised that he's gonna think about a framework and he's the emperor. So I think that sort of set at least the precedent for one of the largest market. So I think in general, I would see some optimism. And I also like the fact that Fortune 500 did a survey recently or discovered that a lot of the boards and Fortune 500 executives have now cited AI risk in their SEC filings. So that is a clear sign to me that leadership around the world and investors around the world are really taking this more seriously. So I'm very optimistic. But on the other hand, what can I do as an individual, private, or small fund investor? I can only do as much as I can in terms of
Of course.
supporting the advocacy of AI safety, but at the same time, doing my bit as an impact investor.
Yeah. The saying is individually, we're not being that loud or strong, but enough small voices actually becomes fairly formidable. And I think that is ultimately one of the key important goals is even if there's slight variations in terms of how we interpret it and because remember, one of the key difficulties in the whole world of data and AI, and in fact, I would argue to some degree even technology, as we're focusing on more individual and assistant-like oriented technology, is it's also very contextual to the people. It's very contextual to the society. It's very contextual to the culture. And then naturally there'll be certain differences. But there are certain realizations and common truth which I think very important to at the very least discuss. And by the way, as to the speed, I always like to make the analogy of it's a very difficult question to answer. I'll give you that. My kind of view is if I'm uncomfortable, probably going at the right speed. If I'm comfortable, if everyone agrees, we're definitely too slow.
That's a
That's kind
very
of
constructive framework.
that's David finger in the air type of assessment. I wanted to ask you something. It's not entirely off tangent, but it's been as we've been discussing, it's also been bubbling in the back of my head. And I'll try to bring it back in, but when I again, I'm not a fund or investor, but when I look at the trends of the last several years, from even pre-chain, blockchain, now AI, I'm just, what is your sense? Oh, is the focus very much on the picks and shovels, on the underlying technology, on the underlying tools, or is there a certain trend going more downstream to the applications, to the uses, to the how it gets disseminated? And I'm just curious about that.
Are you asking about what do you think the trends are going to be,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
what will be the
because you know,
risk of those developments? Ah,
so first the trends. Like, I'll give you an example. There was this like half joke. I mean, it was a reality, but it was a joking one where back in the blockchain era, well, literally I call it the era, all you had to do is add the word blockchain into your name, and if you were listed, it's like there was one company that went up 1,000% just by adding the word blockchain. So I'm just curious from an investor mindset, from a community, is it like, where is the pendulum? Is it really the tech that's driving the interest, the focus, the kind of the appetite, or is it also more, or is it more on the usage and the application, and then the risks associated? But first is where it is.
okay. When I was recently at the Fortune AI Brainstorm conference, the most frequently asked question is, where is AI in the hype cycle? I think so. To answer your question, at least for my own personal humble opinion, is that I think the hype cycle is too simplistic, like where the market adoption is, and therefore, you're in this space for so long. AI has taken many forms since the 1960s up to today. It's only Gen AI that took our
Mm,
imagination, right? And then we see the valuation of those big tech companies and certain startups just boom became $1 trillion companies, $1 billion company, like overnight in a couple of years. We then wonder what's happening. So the way I look at it is that AI is here to stay, and Gen AI is going to take a more effective and more interesting form. And the other thing is that valuation is really based on two things. One is
mm,
the actual performance, and one is the story that you tell. so so we have a fear of missing out, so we tend to buy certain chips because we
FOMO.
think they're the most powerful, and we're not going to let our competitor use it, so we better stock it up. And since I have so much money or so much cash, I better load it up. And then I'm the small guy looking up to the big guy, and the big guy is loading up all the stuff and investing into AI. I better do something about it. So
Yeah.
I think it's a bit of FOMO. Honestly, if you ask me, I think we need to stay invested. Like in any good investor will tell you, always stay investor. This AI story never died since the 1960s. Sometimes there's the
Yeah.
winter of AI. One day computer vision wasn't great. One day computer vision was great. When in the 90s, nobody wants to talk about AI, it's a taboo subject. And next thing we know, when it comes to deep learning, it becomes a sexy one. So now with Gen AI, it becomes sexy again. So we have this ups and down, but I think we need to stay invested in AI. Then we can
Yeah.
know what to do with the AI story and what it really could have the kind of impact for our society, of our businesses. So I think the trend is less about which products or which sectors or which domains or which specific technology, but to stay attention to the whole intersection of all these technologies coming, merging it together. I actually recently there was a really sexy startup. I've forgotten what's the name, but I read it in Fortune or something. But basically, there was a blockchain startup that received $60 million in funding I think in the Series A, which is really high, and
Mm,
for preventing AI risk or AI
okay.
frauds. Yeah. So I thought it was a very intelligent idea. I wish I've invested in that. So yeah, but it tells you that it's less about the trend, but rather stay invested into the AI
No,
game,
absolutely.
AI story,
I
and understanding how all these technologies can solve a problem that you care about.
obviously I'm biased in my viewpoint of the world. I'll start off by saying that. But I absolutely agree with you. There are two things which I think is extremely important to keep in the back of the mind. One is AI actually, um, let me say something potentially slightly controversial. We misunderstand it, or we have a misconception on the construct of what AI is, despite all the effort that we spend in trying to break it down. AI is not one thing. It's not just technology. It's not just business. It's not just an application. It's not just infrastructure. AI is an umbrella. It's a family of possibilities because it's all situated on one thing: knowledge. If you and I like to oversimplify things, and I get told off sometimes, but AI is simply knowledge. So the statement that you made is absolutely true because the day we stop investing in knowledge is the day we stop investing in ourselves, period. Having said that, though, and this is the second dimension, which I think is interesting, and I still haven't fully teased it out in my head, is unlike other technologies, which I would argue is slightly more defined, even shuttles, space rockets, or cars, or tables, or logistics. When you deal with knowledge, you have a symbiotic relationship. For example, you could have, take Gen AI, which currently now is the flavor of the month, or take the next one that'll come up. You can have the most sophisticated tool on the planet. If you don't have the right, and I'll use your word there, story, if you don't have the right application, if you don't have the right usage, it's meaningless. It's like having the most beautiful car and the most sophisticated car on the planet on a small island with no roads. It's
And no
great
destination.
and no destination. But if you have the car, you can use it as a flower pot. And that's something which I don't
What
think,
an
and again,
expensive flower pot you got.
yeah,
With
and
leather
that's something
seats,
which
with Hermes leather seats.
I think we're
Uh,
still, again, I might be overgeneralizing, and I don't mean to be unkind, but I think we're still not fully appreciating. And I
exactly.
think we're starting to see that, for example, Gen AI. Well, now, if you speak to people, you're realizing people say, wait, but what is it really doing? What is the benefit? How? And again, it's not because it can't do it. I'm the first person to say the possibilities of Gen AI is astronomical. But it's not just the capability. It's you now need to think about how do you use it. One of the things that,
Exactly.
for example, we've realized is that it's yes, you have a dimension about individual productivity, like David. How can David be better? But the reality, and that's a whole behavioral science conversation, is not all of us are even motivated to suddenly be better. How many of us actually go to the gym because we want to look better? Like, it's a percentage. And then the other side is about enterprise. It's about business productivity. And that's a different angle and different perspective rather than the individual. So you see my point. All I'm trying to get here is that it's not just about the tools, the picks and the shovels, it's about the platforms, which may be true for other areas. That as long as you get that right, 80% there. Here,
Yeah.
I think we're starting to find that this you really have a symbiotic relationship that the two have to come together to be really successful and to really give you that X factor.
Yeah, I love that. And David, I think you sum it up really well because if we go back to the first question you asked me, what is the purpose, right? What do you define as the purpose? You always have
Mm.
to ask yourself, what is the purpose? And I see technology, AI, as a tool to, is a means to an end. So you got to be very, very clear about the why and the purpose of why you're doing this. What is the real problem you're trying to solve? It's not about finding a use case, but rather finding what do you intend for this to be, and on its own, can you create the value that you want to create? So you need to probably put all these things together. So people forget it's the human that makes the final decisions behind the technology. So what that means that you have to decide what should be the strategy around this, why are you doing this, how are you going to measure yourself, and remember it's not that easy to implement at the end of the day. There's a lot of change management, stakeholder engagement, and all that jazz to really make something work and make sure there's a widespread adoption in order to give you that return on investment. Right now, the AI story is very sexy only because all the two providers are coming out in force with their capital and with their marketing campaigns. They are They're doing the sexy dance in front of you, but who really leave with those decisions is the users, is the customers, and the companies and the governments. So we do really need to be very thoughtful and intentional about where we are putting our investments.
Vaughn, I'm literally just going to take that. That is a beautiful summary. The only thing I'm going to say is intent. It's having deliberate and purposeful intent. And with that, Vaughn, thank you so very much for spending time with me, with us. This has been a fantastic conversation, and I keep on saying this, and I really do mean it. We need to have part two.
Absolutely. Thanks, David.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in to Data, AI, and Everything. Make sure to subscribe for more episodes that explore the cutting edge of data and AI. Stay tuned and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible.